need to tell you about. We know that Justin Trudeau has a disdain for democracy and therefore for you as the Canadian public. I want to talk about that just a little bit more and something that came out this week. But before I go there, let me review the journey that we've been on over the last 8 months since COVID kind of hit Canada and took us by storm. So you'll recall that back in March, there was a decision that was made within Parliament that we would hit the pause button. We would figure ourselves out and then we would resume. And so parliamentarians went back to their ridings in good faith that Trudeau would bring us back in time when it was safe to do so. And so we went back into our ridings, we served our constituents from there, and of course, lots of questions, lots of things to figure out in terms of how to respond to COVID and best manage it in order to keep Canadians safe and secure. So we got a handle on that, at least to a good extent. And then it seemed like it would be appropriate to bring Parliament back in a reduced capacity so that we were safe, but nevertheless to come back, to be able to engage in debate, to be able to pass legislation, to be able to make decisions on behalf of Canadians. Other parliaments were doing it, other governments around the world were doing it, and they were proving that it could in fact be done in a safe capacity. Provincial governments were also doing it, and of course, again, very effective in doing so. Nevertheless, Trudeau refused. You'll recall he did not want to bring Parliament back. He didn't want to be held accountable. He didn't want to allow for question period to take place. And he certainly didn't want to include opposition in creating legislation and making spending decisions. So he kept his finger on the agenda that he was moving forward and did not allow us as the opposition to speak into that in any way. You'll recall that one of the things he tried to do was actually this massive power grab. So right from the beginning in April, he tried to pass a bill that would give their government spending power for 2 years with zero accountability built into it. And so basically they would just be able to spend here, there, and everywhere on anything that they wanted. And there was nothing that the Canadian public or we as elected parliamentarians could do to hold him and his government accountable. Now, that's so wrong on many levels. Luckily, we were able to draw attention to that, and because of pressure from you, the Canadian public, as well as the media, Trudeau backed down. Nevertheless, a ton of money was spent and very little accountability was made possible because Parliament remained closed, and to this day does. So with that then, I think it's important just to understand how things have been functioning over the last number of months. Now, under this, one of the things that Justin Trudeau has done is he has used this phrase repeatedly, that it's unprecedented times. And so he'll make a decision, usually dictatorial in nature, an abomination to democracy, and he'll say, well, it's unprecedented times. Well, yes, it is unprecedented times in 2 ways. One, we haven't seen COVID before, but the other way is that we've never seen a prime minister act to this level in terms of his control, in terms of his manipulation, in terms of wanting to push forward his agenda without consulting with the Canadian public or respecting democracy as a whole. And so certainly it is unprecedented times, and it's wrong. So I wanted to draw your attention to that. Now, in addition, there was this thing that took place in June called the WE scandal. And you'll recall that it was discovered in June between the Conservatives and the NDP. They did a little bit of digging and found out, wait a minute, Trudeau agreed to give $912 million to an organization called the We Charity Foundation. And this organization was supposed to roll out grants for students who were doing volunteer work this summer. $912 million. Now, as we found out, the We Charity brothers and the Trudeau government had a very close relationship. Morneau, the finance minister, and Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada, were basically BFFs with Heelberg boys. And so there was like this backroom deal made that all of this money would be put to this organization. Now, here's what's interesting though, is that this organization in the past has used their money to pay for Margaret Trudeau to speak at different arrangements, to pay Justin Trudeau's brother to speak at different arrangements, and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau is directly involved in the organization as what they call an ambassador. And so she also, though hasn't been paid, has financially benefited from this organization. And so there's just these ties that are far too close to be comfortable with. So of course the Canadian public, they were outraged when this was exposed. And so we as Conservatives had a responsibility then to defend the Canadian public. Here's why this was so important. Because it is tax dollars, your dollars, that are being taken by the Prime Minister of this country, given to this organization, and then this organization is taking that money and giving it to members of the Trudeau family. Now, I'm not an expert on these things. I don't have a law degree, but could it be money laundering? Maybe. Very similar. Certainly money is being funneled from the government, which is your money, and then landing in the bank accounts of Trudeau family members. That's wrong. And so this massive breach of ethics was taking place. And so once this began to be exposed, of course, as you can imagine, Prime Minister Trudeau and Finance Minister Morneau were incredibly uncomfortable, as they should be when you get caught. So from there, the Finance Committee began to meet. And Pierre Poilievre, of course, who is part of the Conservative team, was a hound dog. Good for him. And so he was holding the Prime Minister accountable, he was holding the Finance Minister accountable, he was holding the Trudeau Liberals to account for their actions. He was doing a very effective job. The Ethics Committee, of which I am the chair, also began to meet. And we started asking good questions and calling for further study. Now, interestingly enough, the Liberal members at the committee table did everything they could to try to shut it down. They filibustered for hours. You can go watch it. It's not very entertaining, but nevertheless. And so they wanted to stall. They wanted to prevent the Canadian public from having access to the information that they deserve to have, which again is just a slap in the face to democracy every time these roadblocks are put in place and the government is protected. So this went on for the months of July and part of August. And part of what the Ethics Committee did is they requested that there would be these documents from Speaker Spotlight, and which would reveal who has spoken, how much they've been paid, what that whole ordeal looked like within the We Charity Foundation. And so these documents would reveal information in terms of how money is being used. These documents were then due back to the committee for review, for study, and that was supposed to happen in August. Interestingly enough, on August 18th, just a day before these documents were due to our committee, the Prime Minister steps in and makes a massive announcement to the Canadian public. And of course, that is that he's proroguing Parliament. Now, prorogation is a big deal because it's not just hitting the pause button, it's actually deleting everything that has happened up to that point. It's getting rid of it. It's to the best of his ability, he's creating a clean slate and trying to start over again, a redo. And so he effectively shut down committee, shut down Parliament, shut down everything. Doors are locked. And so as a result then, in our Ethics Committee, we no longer were able to receive the documents that we had requested. Coincidence? So, interestingly enough, there were documents that were also requested by the Finance Committee, and these are documents having to do with the communications that took place between the We Charity Foundation and ministers' offices. And so there's about 5,000 pages worth of emails and correspondence that took place. Now, Trudeau said, we'll give you the documents even though we've prorogued Parliament. Such a gentleman. Here's what these documents look like. You've probably seen them before, and you'll note that they are entirely blacked out in the areas of importance. So they left the things that we don't really care about, and they blocked off the things that really would provide us with details of this correspondence and what transpired. And so there's this one, you can see it's blacked out. There's this one, you can see it's blacked out. And then there's documents, and then there's pages like this, where just the whole thing is blacked out. It's ridiculous. Again, Where is the respect for democracy? Where is the respect for the Canadian people? It's just not there. So Parliament is prorogued, documents are blacked out, Conservatives, NDP, Bloc, the opposition are kept out of the loop, prevented from being able to access the information that we would need to access. And of course, the Canadian public then is being held in the dark. So, where does this bring us? It brings us to today. And I wanted to lay this out clearly for you so that I could bring about perhaps a little bit of understanding in terms of the path we've walked and then where we're potentially going under this government. And so this week, we celebrated International Day of Democracy. Now, this is interesting to me because the Prime Minister decided to release a statement. And this is where I just want to bring you in close for a moment. Because he issued this statement about the importance of recognizing democracy and making sure that Parliament respects the people of this great country. Now, I agree with that notion, but his way of understanding that and my way of understanding that are entirely different. So I want to read his statement to you because it's actually unbelievable, the things that he says, and actually how it is a direct contradiction to what democracy truly is. So this is what Trudeau wrote. He said, you know, the focus is going to be on COVID-19. We're going to uphold democracy, Canada's democratic traditions, and the values that bring us together. And then he went on to make a statement. And so here's what he said. He said, to continue the fight against disinformation and hate speech, the Government of Canada is harnessing the tools at its disposal to mitigate these actions online, including through the Digital Citizen Initiative, that's the name of it, which was launched in 2019. This initiative supports democracy and social cohesion in Canada by promoting an information ecosystem that is trusted, diverse, safe, and free from disinformation and illegal content. The initiative also builds citizen resilience to online disinformation through third-party civic, news, and digital media literacy activities and programming to equip Canadians with the tools and skills they need to critically assess information online. Okay, at first read, this might sound flowery and nice, but let's just break this down here for a moment. Fight against disinformation. Who decides it's disinformation? Who's the information czar? Who gets to determine what is true and what is not, what is in and what is out, what gets to stay and what has to go? Who decides that, and what qualifies them to decide that? Why not allow for freedom of speech, for the exchange of ideas? So when we talk about a fight against disinformation, these are some of the questions that all Canadians should be asking and demanding good answers to. Since when is it the Prime Minister's responsibility to determine what information you should and should not be able to access, and what is information that is good for you and your family, and what is information that's not? That is an extremely dictatorial move. That's not a protection of democracy. So further to that, in his statement, he says that they're going to create social cohesion. That sounds nice. It sounds like we're going to sing Kumbaya around a fire. We're going to hold hands. We're going to be kind to one another. Sure, we can agree that kindness is a good value, that cooperation is a good value, that participation in society is a good value, that a collective initiative is good. But what he means by this is a complete restriction of your freedoms. He means that he doesn't just want to control the information that you do and do not have access to, but he actually wants to control your very actions, the way you live your life, the way you engage with your family, the jobs that you have access to. And that is just far too big of a stretch. That is a direct slap in the face of democracy. Further to that, He says that they're going to promote an information ecosystem that the Liberal government approves of. Yikes. That is political propaganda. So again, it is up to the Liberal government to determine what is available within this ecosystem and what is not. Again, how does that uphold freedom? How does that uphold the very essentials of democracy? It doesn't. So it's interesting to me, it's peculiar to me, that on a day that is set aside to celebrate democracy, to celebrate our freedom, to celebrate the good that has come out of democracies around the world, we have a prime minister who is trying to capitalize on the title, the narrative of the day, by propagating his own dictatorial policies. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened. You'll recall that I've done a few videos actually. This spring, there was conversation around cracking down on misinformation around COVID-19. And I was quite upset by this, as were many Canadians. And so what happened was the Heritage Minister confirmed that millions of dollars were actually going to be spent on information censorship. And so they moved forward with this. This has been a part of, the initiative that's taken place in the cyber world. And so no legislation was presented for this initiative. No debate was had in the House of Commons, because you'll recall it was paused. And there was no discussion. So Canadians weren't consulted. Members of Parliament weren't included. This was just simply a unilateral decision made by the Minister of Heritage and the Prime Minister. They were determining what Canadians could and could not access. Now, the Liberals then have crowned themselves the czar of what is true and what is false, what is information, what is misinformation, what is allowed and what is not. Since when is it the government's responsibility to be the arbiter of truth? Since never. And so this is not democracy. This is actually a direct infringement on our freedom, and therefore actually holds us back from being able to exist, function, prosper in the fullness of who we're meant to be. It's a problem. It's a big problem. Now, I'll agree with this. No one likes disinformation. No one. We like to have the truth told to us. We like to have accurate information, for sure. But as Canadians, we should be trusted with our intellect and given the ability to go through information and to be able to discern where we want to land. That's not the government's role to block us from that. So that said, I would also raise this point, and that is what I have seen from this government is that actually, interestingly enough, even though they've appointed themselves the czar of information, they have also spread some of the most harmful or dangerous misinformation. We saw that during COVID-19. Originally, the government propagated the false notion that COVID-19 couldn't be spread through human-to-human contact. The Minister of Health said, no, that's not possible. Well, yeah, it is. And then also the health minister declared that closing Canada's borders and ports of entry wasn't necessary, that it wouldn't help. Well, we then found out, actually, no, that's really helpful, and we should have done that a lot quicker than we did. And then what about the fact that the government actually misled the Canadian public by telling them early on face masks don't really make a difference? And then they flip-flopped and changed their mind and said, actually, no, wait a minute, wear a face mask. And then now it's gone so to the extreme where you have to wear a face mask no matter what. Well, what's true? What's not? Why did they get to flip-flop on that? So my point is this: we're learning. And there has to be permission to get it wrong sometimes. There has to be permission to access an assortment of information, to be able to go through it and to be able to discern where you're going to land. But if we prevent ourselves as a society from being able to access that different information, then we also prevent ourselves from being able to be innovative, from being able to make strides in new creations, in new technologies, in science. Because we know that actually the dissension that takes place in ideas is what gives rise to something great. And so by actually withholding that opportunity from people, by blocking them from a variety of different information sources, is actually really detrimental to Canadian society as a whole. I would contend that free speech is a part of democracy, that it's a part of a thriving society, that we must share ideas with one another, that we must have the ability to engage in creativity, to be innovative, to put new thoughts out there, and then to have them challenged and to be able to engage in rigorous debate. But if we block ourselves from that, from robust discussion, then we really do hinder ourselves as a Canadian society. And that's a problem. So the question is, when did it become wrong to disagree without being disagreeable? When did that become impossible for us to do? What's wrong with evaluating multiple points of view? And when were these ideals eradicated from the social fabric within Canadian society? Well, a lot of that has to do with the current government and the fact that they are shutting down our access to information and our ability to be free, to use our intellect, to create, to be innovative, to move forward. John Diefenbaker, he was a fighter for freedom. He's one of my favorite prime ministers in Canada's history. And I believe that democracy and freedom go hand in hand. You cannot have a democracy if you do not have free people. You can't. And so regardless of whether or not that information or that freedom that you give to people hinders government or opposes government, you must allow it to stand. You must. Because that is what it is to respect democracy. That is what it is to flourish as a society. John Diefenbaker, he said this. He said, "I am Canadian. I am free to speak without fear, free to worship in my own way, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to choose those who shall govern my country. This heritage of freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all mankind." This is a picture of democracy. This is a picture of good leadership. This is a picture of the Canada that we should all seek to build and enjoy together. This is not the Canada that our current Prime Minister is building, unfortunately. He will use buzzwords all day long, we've seen that. But at his heart of hearts, it is about control. That is what this Prime Minister is all about. And the problem with that is that in the midst of his censorship agenda, in the midst of the control that he desires, he is actually stifling us from being able to realize the full potential that is within each and every individual. And he is therefore hindering our country from being all that it's meant to be. That's a problem. This is what a dictatorship does. A dictatorship says the government does what it wants. In a dictatorship, control is the ultimate aim of government. Control your speech, control your actions, control what you have information or access to. And it's birthed out of a place of fear. I believe that Trudeau is afraid of the potential that is within you. Trudeau is afraid of your ability to think freely and be innovative and creative and ingenuitive and come up with something amazing. He's afraid of that. He is afraid that you might be successful without him. Because he wants to control you, your family, and this country. And if you discover that you're successful on your own, you no longer need him. And that's a really scary point for him. He wants to maintain his thumb over you. Because then he makes sure that your success, that your ability to move forward, that our ability to move forward as a country is reliant on him. It's the opportunity of a lifetime to maintain control, to maintain power, to be reelected. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's a complete slap in the face to democracy. On the other hand, in a democracy, government exists to serve the well-being of the people, to facilitate an environment of prosperity where all can thrive, where they have the opportunity to step into their potential, to steward their gifts and their talents and their abilities, their ideas, and to create something great. In a democracy, people are free to accomplish amazing things. And their government isn't intimidated by that. Their government loves that because the government doesn't feel the need to be in control. In a democracy, freedom is at the center point. Freedom is granted to the people. Freedom is where the government knows we thrive. Out of freedom, the country prospers. In a democracy, citizens then enjoy functioning at their highest level of potential. It's amazing. That's the place we want to land. That's what we want to go for. That should be our aim as a nation. As the official opposition, it is our responsibility to identify these cracks in the essential nature of our country, to identify these places where the Prime Minister is actually attacking the very social fabric that has maintained Canada as the great nation it is. It's our responsibility as the official opposition to defend Canadians, to make sure that we are fighting on your behalf, to ensure that we are helping to facilitate, build a nation that is founded on freedom. A place where you and your children and your grandchildren get to function in the fullness of who you're called to be, the things that you're called to do, the amazing potential that lies within you. That's our job. We're going to continue to fight for that for you. We're going to continue to contend for freedom.